let's talk about one of those rare moments when there you have a face-off, when key institutions such as the Nigeria's Economic Summit Group and the Central Bank of Nigeria had a face-off over matters of the state of the economy. But that's what we saw over the last few days. Of course, again, the face-off between the NESG and the central bank came just as the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo himself, talked about the urgency of now in making sure that the economy gets up and running. And of course, coincidentally, Mr. President himself spoke about the need to release the entire 2.3 trillion naira for the Economic Sustainability Plan. Are we all on the same page? Let's ask Johnson CHUKWU, who is a policy analyst and the CEO at COWRY Asset Management. Good evening, Johnson. Good to have you. Thanks for making the time.
Good evening, Boston, and thank you for having me.
We appreciate your time. So let's talk about this very quickly. What do you think is the common thread in the NESG 15-paragraph document, as well as the response by the Central Bank of Nigeria?
Well, my take is that NESG must have went out of their way to make a contribution to the management, to policy development, policy implementation, as it relates to fiscal policies and monetary policies. If you look at the agenda or the intervention by Nigerian Economic Summit Group, it cut across both fiscal policy issues and monetary policy issues, and some areas that relates to legal issues, as it relates to issues like the amended CAMA and the issue related to the about to be signed into law revised new BOFID. So I think it's in the course of their normal job or their normal intervention that the Nigerian Economic Summit Group regularly intervene on policy issues. They organize an annual summit where policies are articulated and presented to the government. So I think in as much as the response by central bank or some of the recommendations may have rubbed off negatively on some policymakers, I don't think they went out to do a hatchet job. I don't think it was intended, it was done with any ill intention.
Now, Johnson, how damaging do you think this type of face-off publicly between an institution such as the NESG and the central bank, how damaging is it for Nigeria, who is looking for foreign investors? The central bank is a very key institution. The NESG has also been a very major institution when you talk about private sector engagement with this government. Over the years, these annual summits are well attended by government officials and everyone across board. This is very rare, isn't it?
Absolutely. Boston, for me, it's most regrettable. Let me use that word. It's most regrettable that the two institutions, you remember that NESG is like the conglomeration of the private sector operators in the economy. And you're talking of the most advanced, the most civilized, the most articulate private sector operators that are members of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. And then you talk of their position as they're not a pressure group in the real sense of it, but they are a policy articulation arm of the private sector. And they are the highest and most respectable policy articulation arm of the private sector. And they also act as the go-between or interface between policy, private sector operators and the public sector. Then the central bank is sitting at the height of the execution and implementation of articulation, implementation, and execution of monetary policies, and it's a critical advisor to the fiscal authorities. So if these two organizations are seen talking it out in the public space, I think it sends a very wrong signal to the investing public, not just the local investors, but international investors, institutional investors outside the country. It sends a message of lack of cohesion. It sends a message of lack of harmony. And then, for me, it's actually most worrisome. And I think they need to sheathe their sword immediately and come to the roundtable. I was happy when I saw the static comments of the central bank in their response, where they say there are channels through which NESG can engage them. But the concluding part of the central bank response was most scratching. I think that was uncalled for.
Now, so there are always, we're talking about well-placed Nigerians here within the NESG, captains of industry, so I'm sure they will have a channel of communication with the central bank. This coming through to the fore on the pages of newspapers and all that. What about this public-private sector partnership engagement? Because the central bank as an agency of the government in terms of economic transmission, finance, the banking sector, and what have you. Then you have the private sector. So this handshake ought to be there and ought to be warm at all times, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why I said that I was most worried. The fact is that the two organizations, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, like I said, is a conglomeration of the major policy implementers, the major people who are actually involved at the operational side of the economy, the people who are involved in running the businesses. And we're talking of highly structured businesses. These are people who are the commanding height of the private sector. And then the central bank is the one that articulates the policies that affect them. And you must have a channel of communication. There must be a handshake. There must be a consistent interface between the central bank and the economic managers, which is basically driven or organized by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. So I was most worried, and I think we need to quickly repair this interface. We need to quickly fix whatever is the cause of this friction and rupture relationship. The truth is that you can have policies that are meant for people, and those people are loggerheads with those who are implementing the policies. The policymakers must listen to those who are the receiving end of the policies, who the policies are supposed to serve, and then that will help the policymakers to also structure whatever policies they want to implement. Because the policies that are going to implement it in vacuum, they are meant for people, and the people who are the receiving end of that policy must also have a say in how the policies are articulated and what they think should be that are important or relevant or will help them to run a more successful business environment.
Johnson, when we come back, we'll look at the economic sustainability plan, because it looks like at the heart of this entire face-off is the economy itself. So, as the saying goes, is the economy stupid? What's the problem here? What do we want to do with the economy? Mr. President have said there should be a full release of 2.3 trillion naira for the economic sustainability plan, which we put in place in June. The pandemic started in March, globally speaking. We are now in September. We have just about 100 days or so to the end of the year. Where do we go from here, and how quickly should we hit the ground running so that we can prevent some of the kind of friction that we're seeing right now? That's part of the issue. Of course, we'll talk about the immunity or the change to the Bofia Act after the break. Stand by, Johnson CHUKWU, the policy analyst and CEO at COWRY Asset Management. We have a lot more around this corridor when we come back. So let's talk about the Nigeria's Vice President, Yemi Osinbajo's, the urgency of now. Johnson CHUKWU, policy analyst and CEO at COWRY Asset Management. We're continuing with this conversation, Johnson, around the state of the economy, because the whole angst about a 15-page or 15-paragraph document and brickbats between the NESG and the central bank speaks to the heart of the economy and the markets, the urgency of now, which the Vice President, His Excellency, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, spoke about at the ministerial retreat. How urgent should economic reforms be put in place to prevent institutional clashes of this nature that we have on our hands?
Well, Boston, for me, what we have is a near emergency. So when the Vice President talked about the urgency of implementing the 2.3 trillion federal government economic sustainability plan, for me, he was speaking my mind. And the only concern is that I would have actually thought that being the second in command, he will be driving that implementation. He doesn't need to minister to the ministers. I mean, pardon my colloquial, minister to the ministers on the need for speedy implementation of that policy, because ideally one was expecting that he would be the one one of the things we have advocated that the president should hand over the management of the economy to the vice president, which unfortunately has not taken place. If you look at the issues articulated by the vice president in his speech to the ministers at their retreat, there are things that are urgent. He talked about the issue of the agricultural program of the government, which also the Nigeria Economic Summit Group referred to. And they are basically, we are speaking from the same hymn book, because the Nigeria Economic Summit Group was talking about the effectiveness of the anchor farming program. The vice president talked about that and said they have about 4 million smallholder farmers who they expect to employ one person to bring it to 8 million, and those who work through anchor anchor farmers. And they will have off-takers. But the truth is that we have this policy, like the vice president said, 67 days gone. We're not seeing any sign that any of this policy, as it relates to the fiscal side, is being implemented. If anything at all is being done, is the monetary side of that economic sustainability plan. As you know, the 2.3 trillion naira the government has earmarked for the economic sustainability plan, of that, which about 1.15 trillion is going to come from the CBN intervention funds. So, and the CBN intervention funds have already been implemented. So it's basically what the federal government is saying, is that we're going to integrate our policy to what the central bank is doing. But the key thing are the components of the fiscal side of that policy have remained largely unimplemented. The vice president talked about the survival fund, which is supposed to pay the salaries of small and medium-scale enterprises that are not able to sustain the payment of their workers' salaries. Clearly, that has not been implemented, and that's affecting the greatest segment of the economic activities in this country. You know that the MSME account for about 48% of the GDP and employ 84% of the workers of the country's workforce. So if you want to intervene in that sector, and you have 7 days gone after you have come up with the policy and you've not done anything, there's a problem. We talked about the solar panels they want to put in 5 homes. They talked about the purchase of medical items that are produced related to COVID, such as face masks, sanitizer that are produced by the small and medium-scale enterprises. They talked about the support to the rural dwellers through improvement in infrastructure. That has not been done. So if you look at all the issues articulated in the 2.3 trillion naira economic sustainability plan, none, one can say, from the fiscal side that is being done, or we can actually feel. The monetary side, I said, the 50 billion to the small and medium-scale enterprises, of course, we know that is being implemented. The funding to the health sector, pharmaceutical and health sector, is being implemented by the central bank, the 100 billion. The 1 trillion naira to the manufacturing sector and the critical sector of the economy I believe, has been implemented. So what is missing is the fiscal side. And I was happy when I heard the vice president say it, but I think the vice president should drive that process. It's basically his call, because he's the second in command. I believe we have advocated we should have a minister or somebody at the helm of affairs who is coordinating economic activities, so that we don't have some uncoordination in the implementation of some of these policies. Let me tell you, Bosin, the greatest challenge we have as a country is not in terms of articulating very rosy, very sexy policies. Is the devil for us as a country is in implementation. And that's already showing when you came up with an emergency plan that's supposed to address a crisis in the economy, and it's not been implemented almost 3 months gone down the line, then there's a problem.
Now, Mr. President has directed that the entire 2.5 or 2.3 trillion naira should be disbursed. How much do you think we can do or we can achieve before the end of the year?
Well, I did say that the central bank portion of that 2.3 trillion naira is already being disbursed. About the 1.15 trillion of the central bank is already being disbursed. The other segment of that economic sustainability plan, if you look at the funding arrangement, it's actually very weak. It's vacuous in terms of the funding arrangement they have indicated there. So the challenge we'll actually have beyond the president proclamation that disbursement should start immediately, the source of funding will be where the problem will come from. So I can't see clearly how they will fund it, because they are talking of independent sources. The government does not have any reserve. Unless you're talking of additional funding by ways and means, which means that they're also going to tap onto the federal government, central bank, to fund the aspect that has to do with the fiscal authorities.
Thank you, Johnson CHUKWU. Thank you for your time today, and see you next time.